people are starting to have negotiating power. And so people are leaving. Now we're gonna see a selection pressure on managers, which I think is a good thing. You get employees that don't recognize when they actually have a decent manager. So they get so riled up by this stuff, this emotional stuff, right? You feel victimized, but you may not really realize that your manager, because there's like cognitive bias here, right? There's ego. And this is the other problem with these kinds of TikToks is this person is sort of saying like employees aren't putting up with it anymore. But like, what happened to the dude who quit? If you quit a job because someone makes fun of Harry Potter, like what does that mean for your future? Does that just mean that any place where someone wants to criticize Harry Potter, you're not gonna work there?
I don't know when we're finally going to understand that this new generation of workers is not to be played around with. You get what I'm saying? If they don't like a job, they will leave it. Gone. Vamoose. They will quit so fast. A 2-week notice is just a really funny joke to them at this point. It's an urban legend, right? My friend worked at Baskin Robbins for 2 days, right? And my friend had one specific rule. Do not make fun of Harry Potter, right? His manager said, Harry Potter's stupid. My friend said, say that again and I will quit right now. And the manager called the bluff. He said, Harry Potter's stupid. Guess what my friend did? He got a scoop of mint chocolate chip and then got out of there. The manager had to close by himself. My friend said, I will not be disrespected in the workplace. I'm like, look, what? Right at our job, right? Somebody said, hey, don't schedule me on Mondays. And guess what they did? Scheduled him on Monday. And guess what happened? He's not working Mondays anymore because he quit expeditiously. He sent me a SpongeBob meme that says, I don't really feel like it. That's the workplace nowadays. Respect your workers, please.
So there are some things about this that I love and some things about this that you got to be super careful about. So the first thing is that I think a lot of the problems in the workplace have happened because there have not been feedback mechanisms and power dynamics that have mattered. So let me just rephrase that. So the reason that this stuff persists is because there's no like evolutionary pressure against it. So if we think about the theory of evolution, there's like natural selection, right? Which creates pressures that reward certain kinds of behaviors or select for certain kinds of behaviors, and then, negatively select for other kinds of behaviors. And what we've seen in the workplace for a very long time is no selection pressure. And so when there's no selection pressure, bad behaviors have started to propagate because there's nothing keeping them in check. So you'll have these bosses that sort of like will lord their power, their petty tyrants over their employees. And so if an employee says like, don't make fun of Harry Potter, instead of the boss being like a decent human being, the boss is like, I can make fun of Harry Potter and there's nothing you can do about it. And furthermore, what you're telling me is a challenge to my ego because I'm the boss and you're the employee, and I don't think you understand how this relationship works. You don't tell me what to do, I tell you what to do. And I'm gonna demonstrate that to you right now because I'm gonna make fun of Harry Potter again, and then let's see what you do. And generally speaking, that kind of behavior was fine because there was no selection pressure against it, right? So if you look at curliness versus straightness of human hair, to my knowledge, the reason that we have both is because there's no clear selection pressure for one versus the other. So there are all kinds of attributes where you'll see like no selection pressure. So it's kind of like all sorts of random stuff. So sometimes you get a good boss, sometimes you get a bad boss, but the bad bosses essentially aren't punished. There's no problem with it, right? And this is where you see things like this on TikTok where now the power dynamic between workers and employers is changing some. So you're sort of starting to see people like recognize that if I go somewhere else, like I actually don't need this job. So I'm able to find a job that pays as much as you pay me, and I don't have to deal with your toxic ass. So people are leaving. So this is also creating all kinds of interesting things in the workplace where, as people are shifting around a lot, and we've known this for a while, that like moving jobs on a semi-regular basis is on average the best strategy to maximize your income. Not just staying at one place over time, on average. But then you've got to be a little bit careful because there are exceptions. I mean, it's not really a rule, it's just on average. Whereas there are some employers that, sticking with one place for an extended period of time can be very good. And moving around a lot will actually be worse. So you got to be careful about some of those truisms, right? Because it's an average. May not apply to even 50% of people. So we'll see things like this. And then the other thing that's happening is the internet is sharing these kinds of stories. And the reason that these stories do so well is because they validate and we feel vindicated because we've been in that position, right? Where it's like, oh my God, like it's like that, the justice boner that I get when I listen to that. Oh my God, I remember I had that boss who's toxic to me and like, I should have done that. We see this a lot actually in medicine. So like, this is where like, you know, during the pandemic, nursing was stressed to a whole different level. So nurses were dealing with an unparalleled amount of work, an unparalleled amount of toxicity of people in the ICU. I have friends that are ICU nurses that like, you know, their family comes in, someone's dying of COVID and is on a ventilator, and family is like, they don't have COVID. COVID is a hoax. Y'all are crazy. Tries to get bleach or ivermectin or like whatever other kind of like stuff. And the doctors are like, that doesn't work. And they're like, first of all, they don't have COVID. Second of all, ivermectin is the best treatment for COVID. Third of all, I don't care about your medical degree. I brought him to the hospital because I don't believe in what you do. And they're on the ventilator because you guys are completely clueless. And then it's like just so damn confusing, right? It's like, if you don't believe in medicine, like, why are you here? Well, I don't know. If you don't believe in COVID, why are you wanting to give him ivermectin to treat COVID? There's just like, and the nurses, poor nurses are on the front line of this stuff. They have to deal with this stuff day in and day out. So they start getting burnt out. Then what happens is everyone calls them heroes. It's like the nurses aren't heroes. They're sacrifices, right? So like, it's great to call the cannon fodder on the front lines. Like, it's great to call them heroes. Like, that's wonderful. Like, let's call them heroes. Like, we really appreciate the work you do. Are you going to pay us more? No. In fact, there's some weird contraction of certain kinds of services during the pandemic, right? So elective surgeries, for example, pay a lot, but we had to stop elective surgeries because everyone's dying of COVID. So we're getting money from the government. Nurses are maybe getting some kind of hazard pay, maybe not. And then what nurses realize is that some places are stressed, okay? And like, they're like, we desperately need nurses because we have 1,000 patients and we have 1,000 nurses and that doesn't work. So then we started seeing like travel pay increase. So then nurses realized like, okay, I'm making, let's say $80,000 a year here and I can be a travel nurse and get paid 3 times as much. So like, I know nurses that made 300 grand in the US during the pandemic. And that's because they were travel nurses. And then like, employers get super upset because all their nurses are leaving because some places are starting to pay like ridiculous amounts of money. You even see legislation getting passed in places like Texas where it now becomes illegal to be a travel nurse. You can't leave anymore. You can't accept a job in another state, which is like, wow. You also see this with residents, right? So medical residents, for those of you that don't know, like we basically are like indentured servants. So I once calculated that when I was in residency my first year, I got paid something like $3 an hour or something like that. And so what happens is in residency, like you have no option to move. So you sign like a 4-year contract. And if you don't like it, like you just can't find a job somewhere else. So part of the reason that residents get paid very little and like don't really advocate for themselves because they can't. They have no negotiating power. And so what's happening now is like people are starting to have negotiating power. And so people are leaving. And like now we're going to see a selection pressure on managers, which I think is a good thing. Because now managers like have a choice. Either you can be an asshole manager or you can be a good manager. And then the next thing, and this is the thing. So I think like all this stuff is good because there hasn't been selection pressure that has allowed managers to be essentially like bad human beings and like not treat their employees with respect. The downside, the real downside that I've seen with this is that sometimes you get employees that don't recognize when they actually have a decent manager. So they get so riled up by this stuff, this emotional stuff, right? You feel victimized, but you may not really realize that your manager, because there's like cognitive bias here, right? There's ego. And so you may not realize that like, it's not that your manager is being toxic, it's that you continue to screw up at work and they're actually trying to help you. And so the third time that they bring you into their office and talk to you about it, you feel disrespected. And then like, you're like, F this, I'm out the door. And this is the other problem with these kinds of TikToks is this person is sort of saying like, you know, employees aren't putting up with it anymore. But like, what happened to the dude who quit? Like, what happened to the Harry Potter, the dude who quit when someone made fun of Harry Potter? And this is what like concerns me, right? Is if you're like, I can sort of like, I can get the sort of sense of social justice there. And it's like, if people are going to deliberately disrespect you, that sounds like a toxic work environment. You should probably leave. On the other hand, if you quit a job because someone makes fun of Harry Potter, like, what does that mean for your future? Does that just mean that any place where someone wants to criticize Harry Potter, you're not going to work there? Like, what if they just have a valid criticism of Harry Potter and it has nothing to do with trying to, you know, create some kind of power dynamic to disrespect you and put you in your place, right? So, because that's the way that these things are framed, right? Is like the boss like looked at me and they're like, Harry Potter sucks. And it's, you know, I don't doubt that the person who was on the receiving end of that felt that that's what's going on, but that may not have been what was going on, right? So like maybe what's going on is the person, your boss just doesn't like Harry Potter and like what, they're not allowed to make entertainment choice criticisms? Like, oh, I dislike The Wire. Say that one more time and I quit. What, bro? I don't like The Wire. I'm out of here. It's like, hold on a second. Is that what we're really talking about? Because I can absolutely see the first scenario happening, which we talked about, because I've seen that, where you have petty power struggles from managers that are like trying to put you in their place because they have a big ass ego and like want to show you who's boss. And should you quit in that situation? Absolutely. Teach them a fucking lesson. But what we're also seeing is people who are completely intolerant and are like quitting jobs at the drop of a hat. And I just don't know what their employment prospects are. Like for the person who quits, like do they pay their mortgage at the end of the month? Do they have a mortgage? Like what are their personal relationships like? Are they, you know, like and this, we see this, right? We see this on like places like Tinder and Bumble and dating sites where it's like, refuse to date anyone who does not love Harry Potter. You need to be this tall, make this much money, and have to love Harry Potter. By the way, you can't just love Harry Potter. You have to be a Gryffindor or a Ravenclaw. No Hufflepuffs, no Slytherins. And so what does that mean for that person? So this is like this is what I think is the problem with sort of like these kinds of TikToks is like I can get behind them. I absolutely can, because there are power dynamics in workplaces. There are power dynamics that have gone unchecked for far too long. And sometimes when your ego gets out of whack as an employee and you think that someone is intentionally disrespecting you, whereas like, let's remember in the grand scheme of human communication, sometimes people don't intend to hurt you in any way. Sometimes you're sensitive, and sometimes like conflict resolution instead of grabbing a cup of mint chocolate chip ice cream and walking out the door is like a healthier long-term strategy. Right? I'm not saying that it doesn't feel good, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying, like, be careful if that's your default, right? Like, oh, like, what's better, tacos or burgers? If you say tacos, I'm a quit. It's like, okay. So be careful. So I think this is also like a great example of what we're seeing in sort of like the corporate wellness and corporate mental health space is, so everyone's like, we got to focus on wellness. But the problem that I see is that wellness is like the tack on feature, right? It's like, I'm going to make a single player game and then I'm going to tack on multiplayer functionality. That's different from making a multiplayer game. So we see this a lot also, like even in the, you know, I kind of learned this very well at the Game Developers Conference a couple weeks ago, where it's like, you know, people will like, game developers are now thinking about, okay, we want like positive communities, right? but they sort of say that at the end. And they're kind of saying like, oh, like we need more positivity in our community. When it comes to the game design, microtransactions are critical in the design of the game. We want to make a game that is so microtransaction friendly that is built on microtransactions. So the design happens early on, right? We want to make a great game. By the way, let's include microtransactions. Where are the microtransactions? Where's the subscription? Where's the battle pass? You know, how are we gonna monetize this? And then towards the end, 90% through, you've made your game, you figured out how you're gonna charge your player base, you figured out you're gonna customize armor and sell cosmetics and this kind of stuff. By the way, when we're developing character models, we need to easily be able to swap out cosmetics. That's a core functionality that we need to think about at the beginning of the game. And when it comes to like positive communities, they're like, we're seeing all this stuff about toxic work environments and like toxic gaming communities, and there's the female gamer market that we want to tap into. So we need some kind of like, let's tack on some positivity at the end. So they go to these developers and they're like, hey, we need some online positive community kind of stuff. And so the developers are like, okay, like we tack it on as an afterthought. So we don't really think about community as a core feature of the game. We think about it as something that we tack on. Now, there are games that think about core community as core features of the game. So the best example of this is like the development of the massively multiplayer online RPG. Because community is a huge part of that. What would an RPG be like if it was massively multiplayer? Not just a multiplayer RPG like Baldur's Gate 2 where each person can control one character, but one person can control all the characters. But if you have a game that is designed for being multiplayer, a game where if you want to beat the last boss, you have to find 39 other people and cooperate with them in a substantial and meaningful way. So that's awesome, right? So that's community that is built into the design. And what we see right now in like work environments and corporate environments, I say this as someone who's like a consultant for these people, right? So sometimes they'll call me in, less so nowadays, maybe on the upswing a little bit. But then like a couple of years ago before HG was a big thing, this is what I used to do for people. So I ran a program that trained 650 people in resilience skills a year. And so then I started working with companies and they'd be like, you know, hey, we want like a wellness program. So I'd be like, cool, like let's build you a wellness program. And so what they tend to do is they call an outside consultant who then makes recommendations. And they'll go to people like HR. And this isn't HR's fault. This is just like what HR is tasked to do, right? So your CEO goes to HR and says, hey, people are complaining about burnout. We need to do something about it. And then the HR person does their job, right? They look at what's out there. They read some scientific papers. They like look at industry stuff and they're like, oh, meditation helps reduce burnout. Let's get everyone a subscription to a meditation app. Let's get everyone like access to an EAP, employee assistant programs. Those are good. They're not wrong. But they're also like tacked on, right? And then what happens is like boxes checked. We're done. So CEO goes to HR and says, hey, we need a solution for burnout. HR is like, this is what Google and Microsoft and these other companies are doing. They have meditation stuff. We can get a subscription to a meditation app. We'll tell all employees to meditate. We'll give them a food stipend, which can be valuable, right? We're going to buy them a Starbucks gift card. And we're set. Because when it comes to the design of the job, like wellness isn't really considered, right? Because like 401k, no, that costs too much money. Or like working 5 days a week. Work from home is a great example of this, where it's like, what's the cost of working from home? This is like what's terrifying for people. Or by people, I mean like managers and CEOs and commercial real estate building owners. Right? It's like, we got to get people back in the office but no one's been in the office. It's not like the world ground to a halt. The stuff that ground to a halt because of COVID. But you have a lot of no accountants stopped working because of COVID. Like consultants kept working, investment bankers kept working. There was plenty of stuff going on in distressed investing. Like people kept working. Like even people moved to like telemedicine. Right? And so now it's like that's great for wellness because I just have to get my work done. I don't have to spend 45 minutes driving to work, 45 minutes coming back from work. Like work from home is the worst wellness initiative. Is the best wellness initiative that's ever happened. because it actually makes a substantial impact in people's lives. And it's not tacked on. So what I tend to see with companies that I work with, people that I work with who are at companies, is that if you really want to tackle wellness, like things like employee assistance programs, even Starbucks with gift cards, like there are places that, you'll see this as well, like on the internet, like this place, my workplace charges me 50 cents for every cup of coffee. That certainly doesn't help. And on the flip side, we're going to give you a Starbucks gift card. It doesn't feel like it's enough, which sort of makes sense because it's not enough. It's something, but it's not enough. And so this is something that we're seeing a lot, where people are not thinking about wellness from the get-go. It's not baked into how you do work. How we do work is already established. We're going to do as many mergers and acquisitions as we can this year. We're going to do a lot of deals. We're going to do big deals. People don't think about mental wellness as like a resource that gets depleted. So we think about financial capital, right? We think about how much money do we have to spend. We think about things like space as capital as well. Like, how big of an office do we need? Can we afford to use this space for this kind of thing? We think about time as a resource. How many hours can we work, sort of, right? Or like, how many deals can we get done? But then the problem is that when it comes to like human wellness, like how many deals we can pack into one team, we don't think about what that's going to do to the team. And we see this a lot in the tech industry. So crunch has become a norm, right? And what happened is crunch used to be something that happened every now and then. Like not every now and then, like it happened every year. There's going to be crunch before a big launch. But then what happened is crunch started happening like more and more and more and more. And the people at the top stopped caring about crunch, right? They're like, it gets done. This game needs to release on this date. This is our launch. We need the revenue. We need this. We have investors. We have shareholders. It needs to launch on this date. And you do whatever you need to get it done. I don't care. The good news is that there are a lot of good employers out there. Like I've met a ton of people, senior software developers, things like that, who genuinely care about their employees. Right? We even had an interview a couple weeks ago where like someone's boss is like, bro, you're working too much. You don't need to do this on the weekend. Like, stop. Right? You do have employers who care. You have managers who care. Like they're absolutely out there, and they're not like rare. They're not like purple unicorns. They're like out there for sure. I don't even want to say close to 50%. I have no idea where that number is coming from, but there are a lot of decent people out there. And just think about yourself for a second. Like, what do you prioritize with the people that you work with? Do you actually care about them? The problem is that caring is not built into the structure of work. Right? So like good examples of this are like the 40-hour work week, which now like some countries are piloting a 4-day work week. And even if you work once again with nurses, I talked to nurses. So a lot of nurses in Massachusetts are unionized, and a full-time nursing job is, I think, actually just 32 hours of work per week. That's considered full-time. And so what they'll do is like, they'll work 4 8s or like 32 or 36 or something like that. It's less than 40. So they have like the option of like, if they have to work 36 hours, they'll work like 4 8-hour days and 1 4-hour shift. Or what they'll do is work 3 12s. So they'll work 12 hours a day, 3 days a week. And that's considered a full-time job. So that's like a good example of how like you can modify timing and still get a productive amount of work, like a proper amount of work in, but like be so much better in terms of people's like wellness and their family and stuff like that. Right? Because some people have kids, and it's like, I'm a nurse, I'm married to a nurse, I work 3 days a week, I work 3 12s, my husband works 3 12s, we're fine. Right? So I work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, he works Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and it's fine. But the problem is that we don't think about this during the actual conception of work. We don't think about our workers' wellness and energy when we're designing a job. And so this is what's going to happen, right? We just get stuff tacked on. And I don't think it needs to be like this. The thing that's the real tragedy here is that I think employers can actually do a lot better without making gigantic financial sacrifices, because ultimately, like, what they see is like some kind of heavy financial problem. Because if there's a problem that you don't really think about from start to finish, one solution that you're going to end up with is throwing money at it. So it's just kind of like that's the default solution, whereas you don't need to throw money at it. You just need to think about it ahead of time and actually make organizational changes that are efficient, which is absolutely possible. We just need to focus on it some. Questions? Does that make sense to people? Because I think it's not going to work as long as we're just tacking on wellness. So you're saying it's really a systemic issue? Absolutely. This is an easy question. How do you make middle managers good people? Very easy. The first thing that you do is you, in your recruitment process, look for good people. So right now, if you think about what goes on a resume, all that goes on a resume is results. Right? So this is where, like, I've worked with a lot of people who, have started to ask questions or started to look for people, like even people who are high up at very prestigious institutions. They'll start to try to get a sense of, like, how does this person work with their employees? What are what's your relationship like with them? How did you get these results? What did it cost the people under you to get these results? But everyone's focused on results. No one's focused on the cost of results. That's number one. So just pay attention to it. Number two is you reward them for being good managers, right? So this is something that I had to sort of make this argument, and it was a really easy argument to make. So I was working for a financial institution, and I was trying to explain to them that they need to treat their employees better. It's like, your employees are burnt out, like that. Y'all need to do more about that, like significantly. And then they were like, no, we don't. Right? So I asked them, I was like, what's the cost of burnt out employees? Well, there isn't one. Like, they either do the work or they don't do the work and they get fired. Oh, interesting. Okay. So is getting fired the only reason that people leave? Oh, no. Like, a lot of times people leave. Like, we've got, sometimes people leave because they think they have better opportunities. Oh, interesting. What percentage of people leave? Oh, like, like last year we had one person, really solid performer, rising star, he left. That one hurt. Oh, interesting. How many people do you have to leave? What's the cost of people leaving? What's the cost of turnover? The cost of turnover is high. Now we have to get a new person. We have to train them up. Like, like a lot of the good ones leave. Interesting. Why is that? Well, people just offer them more money. How do you know that? Well, because that's how it works. It's like, okay, let's try talking to them. When you try talking to them, what you find is that, money's important. But for a lot of people who want to do good work, like they'd be willing, and you think about it yourself. I don't know how much money you make if you're watching this, but think about the worst boss that you've ever had and think about the best boss that you've ever had. And would you take a 10% cut in your pay to trade the worst boss in the world for the best boss in the world? And generally speaking, human beings are okay with, not maximizing the most money if there's like a good work environment. Easy, right? People are saying yes, absolutely. So Google figured this out when they started paying their developers slightly less than market rates, but treating them well. So it was like, I remember like back in the day, like the Google cafeteria was like a mythical place that if you knew someone at Google and they could take you as a guest and Google wouldn't charge them a fucking penny. Brilliant, right? I'm going to take you to this awesome cafeteria because you're my friend. This is the privilege of being friends with me because I work at Google. That's awesome. I have access to this sweet thing that isn't going to cost you a penny, is going to be the best food that you're going to eat today. And it's free. They treat people right, right? And then you say, but Google pays like 35% more than most employers in my profession. Yeah, so compared to some other companies, they had started paying a little bit less. And this is my whole point, is that you can pay 35% above average and treat your employees well. And how the hell does that work? How is that financially possible? It's because, get ready for it. I know this is going to sound kind of weird. It's going to sound weird. When you have happy employees who enjoy coming to work and enjoy doing a good job, when they receive praise, when they receive reward, when they receive feedback, when you give them opportunities to grow, when you give them opportunities to learn new things, they will actually outproduce the shit out of a burnt out, crusty, like fried employee. And you will make 100% more than your competitor, and then you can afford to pay your employees 35% more. This is what employees don't understand. So they try to like, here's a Starbucks gift card and a meditation app subscription. They don't understand that they're like shooting themselves in the foot. And you see this, right? Like with like, you see this with like places like Doctors Without Borders, where people like come there and they like work based on a mission. And then like what's the best is that so this is the other thing that some companies learn how to do is that if someone's mission oriented, then that means we can pay them less. So we're going to take advantage of this. And this is what sucks about a lot of the medical profession. The worst though is the teaching profession, at least in the US, where like we take your desire to like give kids a positive experience and we're going to pay you crap. Because we know we can take advantage of your desire to like make the world a better place. The wild thing is that you don't have to. This is where like, thankfully we live in a world where 1 + 1 = 3. So this is where like some of the stuff about capitalism I don't entirely agree with. I'm not an expert in economics, but I do believe that when human beings come together and work together, they actually generate more value than either one can generate on their own. And I think that's where like the extra money comes from. It's not like every dollar that someone else makes is a dollar that I'm not making. It's like you and I, like 1 + 1 can actually equal 3. We can come together and outperform like what either of us could do on our own. And so this is the wild thing, is that if you get people who are driven and you treat them well, like they will do amazing work. And this is what we see about, I mean, you know, we've seen this some. Like we see it in our community. We see it in our team. Like you guys look at this setup and maybe they disagree. Maybe they think they're being treated poorly. But, you know, like that, we try to treat them well. And I think they do a phenomenal job. Like the people who work here are awesome. And we try to do the best that we can by them. And it's possible. I've seen tons of companies do it. Like hopefully y'all have had good jobs where people treat you right. Right? And it's like, we're not going to nickel and dime stuff. It's like, you know, you're coming here to work, like eat whatever you want to for lunch. Don't worry about it. And maybe they just don't tell me, right? So maybe I'm blind to it. So this is the kind of thing where I think if you're an employer, like think about this. Think about the way that you treat your employees. Recognize that wellness is not something that is tacked on at the end. Wellness is something that is baked into the structure of a job. And it's as simple as, you know, not all work is the same for all people. So this is like a huge revelation. So you can have 2 people in the same job that have the same roles, but what they like doing is different. So you can just manage that differently. Right? So there's like, not going to go into too much detail, but this is also where sometimes, like, so especially in like residency, for example. So residency in the medical culture is one where you've got people under you, right? So you have the attending who's at the top. They've got a resident who does the worst work. And then the resident passes on the worst work to the intern. Some of that work the intern has, they pass on to the medical student if they're competent enough to do it. So we have a saying in medicine that shit rolls downhill. So I thankfully trained at a place where that was not the case. And what my superiors did is take the worst work from me. And they were like, you know what? I can see you don't like doing this. Like you should go home. You've had a long day. I will stay late and I'm your boss. And there are some attendings who do that and some attendings who don't. Right? And so then like I learned, I was like, oh wow, like I should ask people what part of their job do they enjoy? And what part of their job do they not enjoy? Okay, you don't like doing this particular thing, then I will do it. So this is the thing about leadership, is that everything is your responsibility. But what we tend to find is that people will pass off the worst work to people beneath them due to a power dynamic. Whereas I was lucky enough to have people who like tanked it, right? And that's what you can also do. Like the worst work doesn't have to go downhill. You know, like if you're a manager, like you can unclog a toilet just like a junior person can. And so I think that it's absolutely possible to create a healthy work environment. It's just, you have to think about it, right? You have to really think about what do we reward people for? What do we care about? What do we prioritize? You know, another just random example of this before I move on is sometimes when I'm doing something, I don't do like couples counseling much, but when I do couples counseling, one member, so I'll teach people how to listen and validate, right? So I'll say like, you know, if your spouse is having a hard day or they're complaining about you not doing something, you know, you can validate that. You can say, yeah, I can totally see how it's like frustrating when I just let the trash overflow instead of taking it out, right? Because then you have to clean it up. Like I just toss it in, it bounces out of the trash can, ends up on the floor, and then you end up picking it up. That sounds incredibly frustrating. That's so hard for people to do because in couples counseling, it's like, but then I'm wrong and they're right. And I can't have that. Right? There's sort of this idea that like you can't give an inch in couples counseling. Because if you admit anything, if you validate their perspective, if you understand their perspective, that means that they're right. And if they're right, that means you're wrong. And we cannot have that. And so sometimes a marriage becomes a competition between one person being right and one person being wrong. And so the only way you can have a winner in that relationship is to have a loser. And we see this with employment as well, where it's like, if I let my employees work from home, they're going to slack off and I will lose. This is the basic problem with work environments nowadays, is that there's become an antagonistic relationship between workers and employers. And the employer has started to think any inch I get, like if I give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. And employees feel this too, where it's like, if I give them an inch, they'll take a mile. People have stopped caring about each other. There's been like a loss of collaboration and an increase in antagonism. The cool thing is that when you do reflective listening and you validate your partner in a marriage, both of you win. It doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong. It just means that you understand.